自從19年頭小弟踏上黑記之路，
魏晉仔執石仔，魏晉
耐唔耐都俾啲強力人士搭膊頭要求傾下偈嘅。
你都知道，可能有啲可能性媒體或者其他資料創作性有機會可能煽惑到一啲仇恨或者假資訊。OK 㗎，
驚你俾人利用啫，驚你俾人利用啫。
咁有幾次更加 send message 嚟，盡附上小弟全家嘅姓名、地址、身份證 number、電話，乜都齊晒啊！
爆炸頭哥你好啊，有啲嘢想提提你。你身份證係唔係 XXXXX？ 老豆身份證、老母身份證、兩個家姐身份證，你住 XXXXX？ 提提你今日同612唔好周圍亂玩啊，尤其是上山好危險㗎，我驚唔知有咩人會搞鳩你，或者又會打俾你屋企人揾佢哋飲下茶。總之屋企坐定定唔好亂走啊，好危險㗎。
所以小弟咧就將一隻老虎乸同2隻貓寄咗過去英國先，等佢哋過難民生活啊。安頓好佢哋之後，我再返嚟香港做留下來的人。2024年6月3日。即日買機票返香港，6月4日一出機場即刻收到 message 啦。
早晨，歡迎返來香港，做好準備未？準備好喺湊格過生日，又送埋 XXX 同啲貓去英國，自己諗。
證明當初我踢走佢哋嘅決定係冇錯嘅。之後梗係返嚟做回流 KOL，等黨收編啦，享受由治及興帶嚟嘅好處。你哋準備好未？好啊，大家好，今日咧又講下美國選舉啊，其中一個主角啊，亦即係 Donald Trump 揀出嚟嘅共和黨副總統候選人啊。嗱，咁凡斯咧早幾日咧就接受咗 CNN 一個訪問啦。嗱，大家唔使擔心啊，雖然全部英文，咁但係咧我已經幫大家翻譯好咗噶啦，都係 AI 翻譯嚟嘅啫。英文咧就應該係9成9都啱嘅，我睇過下。咁但係中文咧佢都係即係機器翻譯咁樣樣啊。咁但係咧完全冇問題嘅，你睇得明佢講啲乜嘢嘅，即係有少少字眼上係有問題啦，我都唔太過理佢啦。即係總之你大概明佢意思就 OK 啦。即係我唔會話太過執着嗰20幾分鐘隻字不錯咁，但係你一睇就知係機器翻譯嚟噶，即係唔使擔心啊，都係 Google Translate 咁樣樣嘅啫。今日1對1嘅訪問啦，咁個女主持咧就叫做 Dana Bash 啦，咁都幾出名嘅。咁佢前夫咧就奧巴馬年代嘅國防部參謀長同埋咧 CIA 參謀長嚟嘅。咁歸類咧佢都應該係民主黨嘅人嚟嘅。咁呢個女記者咧出名毒辣噶啦，即係嗰把口啦吓。咁係咁咬住阿凡斯唔放嘅，同埋咧佢俾咗好多語言陷阱佢啦。咁但係咧凡斯呢個訪問入邊咧簡直係一鳴驚人啊！首先咧頭腦咧係非常之靈活清晰啦，同埋咧係有嗰種親和力嘅。咁主持人俾佢嗰啲陷阱咧，其實全部咧都係好游刃有餘咁樣化解到啦。一係就灑走佢啦，一係咧就可以咧嚟一個華麗嘅轉身反擊啊！咁但係咧成程咧都係不卑不亢嘅，即係唔會話好有侵略性咁去反擊啦，唔會話好 aggressive 啊，好令人討厭嗰種攻擊翻佢轉頭啦，抨擊翻佢轉頭冇嘅。凡事咧就係好溫和、好不卑不亢、好 humble 咁樣去講佢自己嗰套啦，然之後咧就會感覺得到個女主持咧都係冇佢符啊！個女主持係想不停咁樣報復佢即係咧激嬲佢激嬲個受訪者啦，然之後等佢出錯講咗啲唔應該講嘅嘢啦。咁但係咧凡斯係完全係哇好犀利，即係咁後生一個人咧係做到佢咁嘅功力咧，真係唔嘢少啊！嗱，咁如果係特朗普做呢個訪問的話咧，咁會即係唔使諗幻想到咧特朗普咧不停會屌到佢老母啦。跟住咧就不停咁鬧佢啦或者係好有攻擊性咁樣樣啦，或者係甚至乎變咗一個鬧交咁嘅節目都唔定啊！咁但係凡斯咧喺22-23分鐘嘅訪問入邊咧，全程咧都係冇俾佢挑動到任何嘅情緒嘅，兼且咧俾啲乜嘢佢咧，佢都可以反擊得到兼且係靚嘅，唔係核突嘅。咁當初咧，特朗普就揾阿凡斯嚟做候選人啦。咁華文圈入邊咧，其實凡斯就唔係話太過出名嘅啫，好多香港人都唔係好知佢係邊個。咁所以咧有個評論咧就話佢係花瓶咁樣樣啦，因為 Donald Trump 係強勢，咁唔會揾個勁嘅人嚟同自己合作啦，因為即係 Donald Trump 自尊心好強咁樣樣，一定要食住佢咁樣樣啦。咁我有一條片咧都解釋過，其實唔係凡斯呢個人咧，其實好鬼勁，同埋咧佢即係揀呢個人做副總統候選人咧係有深謀遠慮嘅。凡斯同特朗普咧，簡直係一粒一突啊！咁喺呢個訪問入邊咧，佢冇乜話點樣耍太極講嗰啲即係遠大空嗰啲虛無縹緲嘅嘢嘅。咁乜嘢係遠大空耍太極咧？奧巴馬就係一個表者啦。佢出嚟咧講嘢咧係好有願景好感動人心好有嗰種心情嘅撼動嘅。咁但係咧聽完之後咧停一停諗一諗，喂佢講啲乜嘢咧？好似 好虛無縹緲嘅，佢冇啲好實在嘅嘢。不過咧但係奧巴馬講嘅嘢咧好 peace 到人嘅，即係咧係一個和平大使啊，一個係好即係唔係膠嘅，即係一個左派嘅人啦，可以話係，即係好令人好舒服啊，即係面面俱圓咁樣嘅。咁但係咧佢講完3-4個鐘之後咧，你可能諗翻，哇，即係好似冇乜點聽到嘢，啲實質啲行動嘢政策嘢想過邊啲標想呢幾年做啲乜嘢咧？即係聽完奧巴馬講咧你係心情舒服嘅好澎湃激昂。咁但係咧好多時咧都係冇啲咩實質嘢落得到袋嘅。咁但係凡斯喺個訪問入邊咧就好 practical 嘅講嗰啲嘢，即係好貼地啦，好 layman 嘅，即係好可以話佢好工人階級啦，或者係好多嘢咧都係美國人本土自己咧係關心嘅嘢咧，佢都講到出嚟嘅。咁同埋咧佢不停咁營造自己一個即係咧唔係好刻意即係唔小心滲出嚟咁樣啦，即係當然好有技巧咁樣啦，就塑造到咧自己一個好family man 咁樣嘅形象啦。咁所以咧你全程睇入去咧好入屋噶，即係唔係一個好高高在上嘅未來嘅領導人咁樣啦，而係一個可能好地方嘅議員仔好一個地方官或者一個社區領袖咁樣，即係好有一個親和力嘅感覺嘅。佢講到俾你聽咧，佢嘅願景係乜嘢？咁但係咧就唔會話太過虛無太過假大空嗰啲美國夢咁樣啦。咁佢俾咗一個感覺咧，就係咧成程咧個主持人咧就想啄住佢唔放嘅。咁但係咧就都係奈佢唔何，因為咧佢真係做足晒功課，所有政策啦嗰啲所有政策啦，所有想做嘅嘢咧，其實咧佢哇真係好似入晒骨咁樣，唔係得表面嗰層喎，而係咧真係好深入咁研究去民主黨共和黨甚至乎咧係 Donald Trump 嘅政策，哇，真係好勁喎！其實咁我舉個例子咧，有個最尾嗰幾條問題咧有個陷阱嘅，就係咧特朗普就話對家咧係無端端變咗黑人喎，咁你係咪覺得佢係黑人先？咁呢個問題咧，其實咧你答係或者唔係咧，你都係死鳩緊嘅。如果你係咁樣話對家無端端變咗黑人的話咧，咁你即係咁你就會得失一邊人啦。咁如果你話唔係佢唔係黑人的話咧，咁即係同自己嘅老細作對啦。咁即係係同唔係都係死鳩緊嘅。咁但係咧，佢用一個即係類似笑話形式咁樣帶過啦，就係話我相信佢咧，即係佢講乜嘢自己係咩人就係咩人啦。咁我都相信佢嘅咁樣，好搞笑。跟住咧，佢完咗一句之後咧，咁一句嘢咧就帶走咗個主持人嘅問題，然之後咧就再講翻佢嗰啲種族嘢即係其他嘢啦。咁好唔突兀㗎，凡斯咧真係好 smooth 嘅全程你嗰啲陷阱咧佢唔會招呼你因為你一招呼你咧，咁即係墮入咗你個陷阱入邊佢咧完全唔理你個陷阱完全唔踩嘅跟住講翻自己嗰套。主持人咧即係你感覺上咧就咁嘅八婆好黑人憎咁樣講嗰啲嘢，擺明有晒立場啦。你可以話佢本身係個人係有立場係有政治傾向嘅有得，咁但係咧亦都可以解釋咧就係話，咁佢做呢啲節目嘅主持人一定咧要係即係好尖銳，好一針見血，好想即係懟你出嚟噶嘛，好想咧就懟到你發脾氣咁樣嘅，即係咁佢呢個女主持咧就即係撇除咗政治立場咧，其實佢做得好嘅都係。咁但係咧如果你係撐 Donald Trump 的話咧，你就當然覺得佢有晒立場，有晒偏見咁樣啦。咁但係咧個女主持都功力唔差嘅，即係佢都係一個出名嘅人嚟嘅。咁但係估唔到咧，凡斯咧就真係略勝一籌即係唔係略勝一籌咁簡單，係略勝幾籌。咁所以咧，你到中後期咧，即係個女主持人咧，即係純粹問完條問題就算啦，俾你發揮都喐唔到你啲咩，佢半放棄狀態。個女主持咧就好似係半放棄狀態咁樣樣即係問完條問題你自己發揮你都係俾你攞 credit。我點樣督你咧，你都係唔就範㗎。我點樣督你咧，你又唔上當。咁然之後一個屈尾十咧，咁你自己去再promote自己嗰啲嘢再講自己嗰套理念其實全程咧諗住懟到你死噶嘛懟到你難堪咁樣樣噶嘛咁但係咧到最後出嚟個結果咧，居然咧係幫佢拉票咁樣樣，好似係。咁仲有一個例子咧，就係凡斯咧就話賀錦麗變色龍啦，成日變顏色啦，個膚色無端變咗黑人啦咁樣啦。咁但係咧個主持又窒翻佢咧，咁你都係變色龍啦，之前係反侵噶嘛，依家就變咗侵粉咁樣樣。咁但係凡斯咧就借力打力佢話啲咩咧？當初咧你就咧嗰啲傳媒好多啲假消息、假新聞啦報一半唔報一半咁樣屈 Donald Trump 好多錯誤嘅嘢出咗嚟啦，我先至會上咗當嘅啫。咁但係咧即係了解得多之後咧，就發現完全唔係嗰回事嚟嘅傳媒即係你哋依班主流媒體講嗰啲嘢咧，擺明有晒立場，我哋中咗招。咁所以咧，我依家咧就可以撐Trump啦。我嘅變色咧唔係為咗自己嘅利益嘅，我嘅變色咧就係即係見到個真相先會變，所以咧係完全兩樣嘢嚟嘅。咁佢呢個咧就即係借力打力 主持咧本真係想督鳩佢嚇，即係咧撩佢難堪咁樣啦。咁但係咧阿凡斯咧真係化解得到之餘咧，借個機會冚翻你一巴添啊！即係佢冇講明係你 CNN 咁樣啦，你呢個主持咁樣啦。咁但係咧即係佢講埋大朗嘅一個稻草人就係咧好多反侵嘅主流媒體亂咁報嗰啲嘢誤導大家咁樣啦。咁喺兩個黨嘅4個候選人入邊咧，即係以政治嘅功力對答出嚟嗰套嘢咧，阿凡斯咧真係贏足晒。咁特朗普咧就係一個魅力型嘅領袖啦，凡斯咧就係一個實幹型啦、貼地啦、好利民、好親和嘅一個實幹型領袖嚟嘅。咁同特朗普咧真係絕配，我覺得。咁相反咧，民主黨嗰邊咧就好明顯唔係sell 緊佢個人嘅，而係 sell 緊左膠中意嘅嘢左膠中意黑人，左膠中意女人左膠中意有色人種，跟住咧左膠又中意嗰啲打過仗嗰啲人即係為國效力嗰啲人啦。咁即係總之堆湊到你哋中意嘅嘢出嚟咧，我哋又俾啲咩你食。咁但係民主黨嗰兩個有冇啲咩個人特點或者係個人之處唔選你唔得嘅，咁又好似真係睇唔到太大嘅分野咯。嗱，我之前講過啦，賀錦麗出嚟選之後咧，其實就會 ABB 嘅，即係 anyone but Biden。咁原先係諗住唔投票或者投俾特朗普嗰啲人咧，可能都會轉翻去投俾賀錦麗噶嘛。咁所以咧，賀錦麗嗰個支持率咧係高過拜登好多，同埋咧係同 Donald Trump 咧係即係平起平坐咁滯。所以我之前都講過，我係唔會話好樂觀咁樣 Donald Trump 一定贏緊嘅，因為係有危機嘅。咁依家最重要咧就係嗰班中間派搖擺州份嘅人咧究竟點樣選不嬲咧都係決戰搖擺賓州嘅。咁如果今次出席訪問嘅特朗普咧，咁好簡單嘅啫，中意佢嘅繼續中意佢，唔中意佢嘅繼續唔中意佢，唔會有啲咩太大影響嘅。咁但係凡斯出席呢個 CNN 嘅訪問咧，哇，即係可以收納咗一班即係唔知投邊個好，或者咧係或者嗰班搖擺賓州咧都可能會中意佢都唔定即係咧佢即係佢唔會令到未中意你嘅人覺得你好有攻擊性或者好囂嗰啲啦。咁但係佢好 humble 咁樣去做佢嘅訪問，兼且咧係可以好好咁反擊到嗰個主持人嘅，即係咧中意佢嘅就會繼續中意佢啦，唔中意佢嘅可能對佢有改觀啦。中間嗰啲人咧可能咧就又開始中意佢都唔定。咁所以咧佢即係做到佢應該做嘅嘢嘅。咁當然啦，即係美國選咁多年嘅選舉咧，其實都話多俾我哋聽咧，其實選民嘅眼睛咧係並不雪亮嘅，通常咧都係選 first impression 嘅啫。咁所以咧即係民主制度之下咧，我哋就 assume 咗所有人咧，或者大部分人咧都係普通人ordinary 嚟嘅啫，即係唔會話個個都，即係唔會假設所有選民咧嗰個智商好似我咁樣160噶嘛只係假設咗大家都係普通人，即係所以咧唔會 assume 你好多嘢咧你哋會知得好一清二楚或者係好深入咁樣了解嘅。咁所以咧凡斯講嗰啲咧，好貼地即係好大眾好啱聽兼且咧係普羅大眾最關注嗰啲嘢咧，佢全部都俾到你嘅。咁所以咧呢個訪問咧，我係絕對推薦大家睇嘅。好，去片。
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Senator.
Thank
so
you.
Within a week of you being named on the BP ticket, the Democratic nominee changed. And you guys seem to be struggling a little bit with how to approach the new dynamic. How are you approaching your new opponent and the new ticket?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty straightforward, actually. We're running against a set of policies that I think have failed the American people, and we're running to a set of policies, President Trump's 4 years in office, that I think really succeeded for the American people. And I think that what's different about it, and you're right, Dana, it is different, but what's different about it is that we're running against a different person who a lot of Americans just don't know. And so I think we have to remind people that President Trump delivered lower prices, lower inflation, a prosperous and peaceful world, and also a secure border, and Kamala Harris's policies have produced the exact opposite. Now, that was an easier case to make when Joe Biden was in there because people associate Joe Biden with the policies, but I think Kamala Harris clearly owns the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, especially when we consider the fact that, as we've all learned over the last few months, Joe Biden clearly isn't capable of doing the job. And so I think that drives home that Kamala Harris really has been the one calling the shots. I mean, how could she not? I think Joe Biden doesn't really know where he is.
Kamala Harris has been calling the shots. As who?
Well, I think she has to have been, right? Because if she's not calling the shots, Dana, then who is? And I do think it drives home something that's fundamentally dishonest about the way that Vice President Harris and also a lot of senior Democrats have approached this. If you remember, for months, even years, the argument was that Joe Biden was sharp, he could clearly do the job, and the minute that he performed poorly in that debate and he became political dead weight, you have Kamala Harris and everybody else trying to throw him overboard. But I think the more troubling question is, why did so many senior Democrats, including the Vice President, cover for him? And if Joe Biden wasn't capable of doing the job, as even a lot of Democrats say now, was Kamala Harris in charge or was somebody else in charge? And that's a real issue.
There's no evidence that Kamala Harris threw him overboard. But I want to move on to something that Governor Walz has called you and Donald Trump, and that is weird.
Sure.
And it is taken off. The New York Times reports that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said, "Not me, they're talking about JD."
Well, certainly they've levied that charge against me more than anybody else, but I think that it drives home how they're trying to distract from their own policy failures. I mean, look, this is fundamentally schoolyard bully stuff. They can accuse me of whatever they want to accuse me of. As Harry S. Truman once said, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I'm doing this because I think that me being vice president will help improve people's lives. So I accept their attacks, but I think that it is a little bit of projection, Dana. If you think about just take a couple of days ago. Tim Walz gives this big speech. He's been announced as the VP nominee. And I remember when I had just been announced as the VP nominee, I gave my big speech and I saw my wife and I gave her a big hug and a kiss because I love my wife and I think that's what a normal person does. Tim Walz gave his wife a nice, firm Midwestern handshake and then tried to sort of awkwardly correct for it. So I think that what it is two people, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who aren't comfortable in their own skin because they aren't comfortable with their policy positions for the American people. And so they're name calling instead of actually telling the American people how they're going to make their lives better. I think that's weird, Dana, but look, they can call me whatever they want to.
You're saying Tim Walz doesn't have affection for his wife? I don't even understand that.
I said that he acted weird, which he did, on a national stage in front of his wife and in front of millions of Americans who presumably were watching at home. And I think that it's projection, Dana. Look, I think this election should be about who's going to solve the inflation crisis, who's going to make groceries and housing more affordable, who's going to secure that southern border. Kamala Harris's record is that she supported all of the policies that made that problem worse, Dana. We're trying to say we're going to take the country in a different direction. I really think that it's important to point this out, Dana. Their entire campaign has not been about here's our policy for how we're going to make your life better, or here's what's wrong with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's policies. We're going to name call and hope that you don't notice that we don't have an agenda. That is the entire Democrat approach to this election.
They have done both. They have both policies, and they are trying to define
Dana,
you as well.
If you go to Kamala Harris's campaign page right now, they still don't have a policy.
Well, let's talk about policy
positions
versus
about what they're going to do. I think that's really insulting to Americans.
You started out talking about the policies in this interview, but you have been on the campaign trail questioning Tim Walz's military record. You say it was shameful that Governor Walz retired from the military before his unit deployed to Iraq. I want to read you something that Joe Eustace, who is a veteran, he served with Governor Walz, said. He said that's a lie. He said he was as good a soldier as you'll find. I'm not trying to defend him. I hope people don't think that. What I'm trying to do is defend someone who served his country. I'm not voting for him. I'll campaign against him. But I don't think it's fair to characterize his service the way they have. Governor Walz served 24 years.
Sure.
He even stayed after he could have retired because of 9/11, more than the country asked of him. Do you honor his service?
Well, of course, Dana, I honor his service, and I've never criticized what Tim Walz did when he was in the military. I criticized his retirement decision, and most importantly, Dana, I criticized his lying about his own record, okay? This is a guy who was captured on video saying, I carried a gun in war. He never went to war. This is a guy who's been captured on video. As other people say, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He's a veteran of a war, nodding along in agreement instead of saying, no, I did serve my country and I did it honorably, but I never went to a war zone. I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look, there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
You talked about one of the things that he said, weapons of war. He was talking in a campaign stop about, he was trying to talk about gun control.
Sure.
And he said, weapons of war I carried in war. I will say that the Harris-Walz campaign did say that the governor misspoke there.
Sure.
Do you accept that?
He misspoke. Another word is that he lied about it, and he didn't correct the record for 15 years until he was put under political pressure because I called it out, Dana. Whatever you want to call it, a misspeaking or a lie, I think Tim Walz should have to correct the record. Now, you pointed out a soldier who defended his service. There have been a number of soldiers who served with Tim Walz who have criticized him on the exact same grounds that I have because it's not right to misstate or to embellish what you've done, and I think that's what he did.
And on the question of when he left the National Guard, he filed his election paperwork February 10th, 2005. That was a month before the National Guard even announced that it was possible that they would deploy to Iraq, and it ended up being 2 months. He retired 2 months before they actually got the paperwork.
But on CNN last night, Dana, one of the people who was actually in charge of him said they knew they were going to deploy to Iraq in February of 2004, fall of 2004. So he knew he was going to Iraq. He decided to quit, to retire, whatever word you want to use.
Retire.
Because he wanted to run for Congress. He lied about that. He said that when he decided to retire, he did not know that he was going to Iraq. That is another untruth, as even his senior military officer said. So again, I'm not criticizing the service, I'm criticizing the dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in favor and for the purpose of political benefit. And I think that the most important thing here, Dana, is it goes to Kamala Harris's judgment. Tim Walz is ultimately going to be the vice president. Kamala Harris is in great health. I'm sure she's going to be president if she wins for 4 or maybe even 8 years. Why did Kamala Harris choose a person who has lied about their military service? I think that is a serious lapse in judgment. And I don't want to hear from a campaign spokesperson of Kamala Harris. I want to hear Kamala Harris herself address what I just said.
You know, I've seen a lot of statements from veterans, including those you served with, saying it's just untoward to be criticizing somebody who served for 24 years.
Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. I've heard from a lot of veterans groups who criticize Tim Walz. The question is, he said he served in war, and he didn't. That is a dishonesty. I couldn't care less what one or the other person says about it. I care about what the truth is. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth. And importantly, Dana, this is about Kamala Harris's judgment. And I think that when you ask, why has Kamala Harris allowed the border to be wide open? Why has Kamala Harris supported policies that have promoted the increase in inflation? I think it goes to the heart of her judgment, and I think that that's what we should be talking about.
One last question. Donald Trump didn't serve in the military. He received a medical draft deferment for bone spurs to avoid serving in the Vietnam War, reportedly as a favor to his father. Do you find that shameful, too?
I think that Donald Trump didn't serve in the military, but he didn't lie about it, Dana. I've known Donald Trump for a long time. He really honors our veterans. He honors me for my service. Donald Trump didn't lie about serving in the military. He didn't say that he went to Vietnam when he didn't. This is the problem. I don't criticize anybody. Whether they served our country or not, I think it's honorable to serve, but obviously a lot of people have reasons for not serving. I criticize somebody for embellishing their record, for lying, saying, I went to war. Dana, do you think that it's a problem that he said, I went to war, but he didn't actually? That seems to be a problem to me.
Well, they've corrected that. Let's move on to...
They've corrected it by admitting that he lied.
Let's move on to another important issue to voters, and
Please.
that is the issue of abortion. You wrote the foreword for a new book by Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts of Project 2025. Project 2025, among many other things, calls for rolling back approval of the abortion drug mifepristone. Donald Trump told me during the debate that he would not block the drug. And on Thursday, when he was asked, he didn't rule it out. So which is it?
Well, look, Dana, first of all, Project 2025 is not affiliated with the Trump campaign. Kevin Roberts is a friend of mine, but I wouldn't say that he speaks for the president in the same way I wouldn't say that he speaks for me. Now, what Donald Trump has said is that he respects the Supreme Court's opinion on the mifepristone ruling.
But let me just stop you right there.
Please.
The Supreme Court, you're a lawyer, so you know this better than I.
Sure.
The Supreme Court, all they did was say that what came to them didn't have standing. So they let it stand. A real question, a substantive question, hasn't made it to the Supreme Court. So my question for you is whether or not a Trump-Vance administration would allow mifepristone to continue to be sent around the country?
Well, President Trump won the nomination of the Republican Party. He said it to you, and he said it repeatedly, that his goal is not to block mifepristone, it's to let states make the decision on abortion policy. Now, of course, that does mean, Dana, we have to be honest about this, that California might have less restrictive rules than Ohio, which might have less restrictive rules than Alabama. I think what President Trump is really trying to do on the abortion question is really admirable, and I wish the press was a little bit more honest about it. He's saying we've had a 50-year culture war over abortion, where unfortunately this issue has just divided the country, and he wants to provide some ground for us to come together, for states to make these decisions, for voters to make these decisions, and for us all to respect one another. That's all he's
on
proposed.
That issue, a few months ago, on the question, his position, which you've adopted, is it is up to the states. I spoke to a woman named Kate Cox. She lives in Texas.
Sure.
She was 20 weeks pregnant. Her fetus was diagnosed with a disease it was a deadly genetic condition called trisomy 18. She said that carrying the pregnancy, she was told this by her doctors, to term, if the fetus even survived, would hurt her chances for having more children, which she and her husband desperately wanted. Why is not allowing her to end that pregnancy helpful or supportive of expanding families like you want it to be?
Well, first of all, Dana, my heart breaks for this woman. I don't know her personally. I've certainly heard the story, and our heart breaks for her. And we want people to have healthy, happy families. And it's extremely unfortunate that sometimes, medicine, the act of God, whatever happens, it just doesn't work out. What the president has said, I think, very clearly is that he is not trying to prevent women who have non-viable pregnancies from getting access to the medical care that they need.
But allowing the states to decide, a place like Texas, which has very strict laws now, doesn't allow a Kate Cox to end a pregnancy that is fatal and could potentially hurt her ability to have more kids.
But what President Trump has said is that we are going to let voters make these decisions. And again, Texas might have a view that President Trump disagrees with. They might have a view that President Trump agrees with, but you've got to let the voters make these decisions.
So you're comfortable with that law in Texas?
I'm not comfortable with anything, Dana, because I'm not passing judgment on what these laws should be. You ask me my own personal view. I campaigned against an Ohio referendum, but I think that we have to let voters decide. And when they speak their mind, you have to be respectful. Agree or disagree with whatever voters decide, they're going to make these decisions.
Welcome back to State of the Union. Here's more of my interview with GOP vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance.
John King is doing a project talking to voters all over swing states. He talked to Republican voters in the critical swing state, must win, I would say, swing state of Pennsylvania.
Of course.
One of them, Carol Carty, said she was almost a childless dog lady because she didn't happen to meet the right person until she was 40 years old. Another, Joan London, was offended that you don't think she has a stake in the future of the country because she doesn't have children. What do you say to key voters like that, Republicans, swing voters, who are put off by your views?
Well, what I would say, Dana, is if you look at what I said in context, the Harris campaign has frankly lied about what I actually said. I'm pro-family. I want us to have more families, and obviously sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes for medical reasons, sometimes because you don't meet the right person. But the point is that our country has become anti-family in its public policy. Let me just give you an example of this. So after our second child was born, my wife and I, we have 3 little kids. After our second child was born, we get the baby home from the hospital. We get this ridiculous out-of-network medical bill that is financially shocking, and we're pretty well off. And that happened because we have ridiculous laws in this country that are anti-family. I've sponsored legislation to try to fix things like that so moms and dads don't get these surprise medical bills. I think it's important for us to be pro-family. That's all that I've ever said.
If you want to be pro-family, I want to, because you do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised. I mean, one of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course, she's not childless. But again,
you called her that.
The criticism. I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticize people for not having kids. I criticize people for being anti-child. And I do think that Kamala Harris has made some bizarre statements. She has said things like, it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think that's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families. I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family. One final point on this, Dana, if you go back to the COVID era, one thing that really frustrated me and motivated some of these comments is we were at a point where we were kicking kids out of school. We were masking 3-year-olds and putting the masks back on them, even as they were trying to rip them off at school. I think that if we had more people who took the right perspective and had a little bit more understanding of how little kids actually operate, we would not have made so many of those mistakes during COVID.
That's a whole other conversation because
no,
people didn't know.
It's related to this
because people didn't know as much because it was literally a novel virus.
But Dana, you asked me about you've now asked me 3 questions about comments that I made 3 years ago. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she supported policies that opened the American southern border. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she lied to the American people about Joe Biden's middle facility for the office. You are interviewing me, Dana, because I respect the American people enough to sit down for an interview.
I appreciate that.
Kamala Harris has been the nominee for 3 weeks. She hasn't sat down for a real interview.
Believe me, we are asking. You're not going to get a disagreement there.
But the point is, Dana, you've got me for 15 minutes or however long you have me. We should be talking about public policies that matter. How are we going to lower inflation? How are we going to reduce the cost of food and housing? How are we going to close down that southern border? We've talked so little about that. We've talked a lot more about a sarcastic remark I made 3 years ago. I think we should talk about the issues that most Americans care about.
I only asked you one question about that. I asked you about policies, and I was asking about the military record that you brought up, nobody else did, of Tim Walz. One last question. This is on policy.
Please.
The Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Donald Trump said this week that he feels strongly that the president should have at least a say when it comes to the Federal Reserve and how to handle interest rates. Do you agree that a president should direct the Federal Reserve on how to handle interest rates?
Well, not direct. That's not what he said. He said the president should have a say, but one, I absolutely agree with what he said.
Right now, the president doesn't have a say.
Well, the president has a say in the sense that the president appoints the Federal Reserve governors. But he's saying, to be clear, President Trump is saying, I think, something that's really important and actually profound, which is that the political leadership of this country should have more say over the monetary policy of this country. I agree with him. That should fundamentally be a political decision. Agree or disagree, we should have America's elected leaders having input about the most important decisions confronting our country.
That would be a huge change, just so people understand that.
It would be a huge change, but whether the country goes to war, what our interest rates are, these are important questions that American democracy should have important answers for. And I think all President Trump is saying is that, look, it's kind of weird that you have so many bureaucrats making so many important decisions. If the American people don't like our interest rate policy, they should elect somebody different to change that policy. Nothing should be above democratic debate in this country when it comes to the big questions confronting the United States.
Okay, one last question.
Please.
And I can't believe I have to ask you this, but I do, because Donald Trump has been attacking Kamala Harris's racial identity.
He has not been, but ask your question.
Well, he questioned her racial identity. He said a number of years ago she happened to turn black. Her father is Jamaican. Do you believe Kamala Harris is black?
I believe that Kamala Harris is whatever she says she is, but I believe importantly that President Trump is right that she's a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience. Look, Dana, she's not running a political campaign. She's running a movie. She only speaks to voters behind a teleprompter. Everything is scripted. She doesn't have her policy positions out there. She hasn't answered why she wanted to ban fracking, but now she doesn't. She wanted to fund police, but now she doesn't. She wanted to open the border, but now she doesn't. She should have to answer for why she presents a different set of policies to one audience and a different set of policies to another audience. And I think that's what President Trump is getting at. This is a fundamentally fake person. She's different depending on who she's in front of.
With respect, you
Please.
changed your position on an important thing, which is Donald Trump.
Of course I did.
And so why are
honest
you not a
about it.
chameleon?
Because, Dana, I've explained to the American people what's different. People change their minds when the facts change, they should. But if you want to be the people's vice president or president, you should have to stand before an interviewer and say, this is why I changed my mind. So to everybody who's seen that I criticized Donald Trump, since he asked the question, here are two things.
You didn't just criticize him, you said he could be America's Hitler.
Well, that's a criticism, and I didn't say that exactly, but set that to the side. What I said about Donald Trump and what I believed about Donald Trump, two things that really changed. First of all, I didn't think Donald Trump would be a good president. He was a great president. Wages were rising. The world was more peaceful. Remember, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, they said he would start World War III. He brought more peace to the world than any president of my lifetime. The second thing, Dana, is I believed, and I'm ashamed of it, I believed a lot of the media lies about Donald Trump in 2016. I believe that he said things like, for example, the media said Donald Trump accused all Mexicans of being rapists and criminals. You actually look at what he said, he did not say that at all. And I think it's important when you see something, you change your mind, and that's all I've done. And my pitch to the American people would be, I imagine a lot of folks who are thinking about voting for Donald Trump in 2024, maybe they've bought in to the media lies about him. Think for yourself, look at what he actually said, and I think you'll find that he's, one, a very engaging guy, but two, was a very good president.
There aren't media lies. We play him and we let him speak for himself, and so people are getting exactly.
I'm not accusing you of lying, Dana.
I know.
You know I like you, but
No,
the
I know
media
you're
lies
not.
from time to time
I know you're
about
not,
Donald
but
Trump.
people hear him for himself. Last question.
Please.
Are you going to debate Tim Walz?
Of course. I want to debate Tim Walz. I think it's important, and I think that it goes to a very fundamental difference between the Trump-Vance ticket and our opposition. We believe in talking to the media. We believe in answering questions. We believe in debating. I think it's really important. I mean, look, I'm asking the American people to make me their vice president. It's really important to stand before the American people to make that case, and I'm going to keep on doing it in whatever forum I get the opportunity.
We look forward to it. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Dana.
sitting down and taking my questions.
Of course. Thank you for coming here.